that its potential as a tool for the benefit of society will be corrupted by greed and mismanagement. That its potential will be realized, that as a tool to provide opportunity for participation in education, economic welfare, to bring the benefits of development to those countries around the world that have not yet experienced it, to distribute the benefits of our planet and the future to all those who are starving, dying unnecessarily. The internet is a fabulous tool to reach those goals. This conference is a perfect example of aggressive policy making in the infancy of a new artifact. It happened in the early stages of democracy, it happened in the early stages of industrialization, it happened in the early stages of the communications revolution. We see government and greed combining to create all kinds of fomentation for mismanagement. The motives appear to be beneficent, they appear to be well placed, but the result very often is unintended consequences. And I think we have to, as a community, globally guard against that. The notion that the hegemony over operational control over the infrastructure by US and North American and other Western industrial interests is somehow bad seems to me to be extremely diverting from real opportunity. The demonizing of those who have brought the internet forward is simply misplaced, and my real hope for conferences like this and an awakening within the UN community is that some laissez-faire opportunities will be brought to the table so that those who have invested in making the internet possible will continue to have the opportunity to expand it and perpetuate it, rather than having it expropriated in the name of some short-term political interest. Greed. Because so much economic activity happens over the network, it is now the place that bad things happen. It's, as we say in the United States, the Willie Sutton phenomena. When asked why he robbed banks, the bank robber Willie Sutton in the 30s responded, because that's where the money is. Why is bad activity happening on the network? Because that's where an enormous amount of economic activity is. Trillions of dollars in economic value move every day over secure networks in the West. And without the internet, without places like bankofamerica.com and NYSE.net and treasury.gov, you have no real economic activity anymore. No one planned that, no one wrote a statute or a treaty or a regulation to make that happen, but out of convenience, this network has made it possible for business to be conducted in a much more expedient way. So even without regard to national security or intelligence community considerations, the pure issue of economic security and the expansion of economic activity depends on a relatively open and non-regulated network community that allows the marketplace to dictate the conditions under which the network is used by those who wish to use it. One of my objectives in being here is to try and make sure that this community doesn't veer off in a direction of excessive regulation or lose sight of the enormous value that is already moving daily over the network. Well, some of what I know about it, unfortunately, is classified, but the parts that I know about it that are not classified make my biggest concern about it the fact that major countries that have huge investments in the network have well-known security mechanisms. The United States has the National Coordinating Center and the US CERT to deal with attacks. Smaller countries that are trying to leapfrog, as Estonia has done, and have a major penetration of the network, become extremely vulnerable. When the Estonian government first saw the external insults coming onto their network, the first place they turned to as a provisional member of NATO were their NATO contacts. And through the back channel of the military communications response system, at least forensics were able to be done through US interests that have knowledge of how to track down network insults. And there are some pretty strong ideas about where the origins of the attacks were from. But whether they were motivated by politics, The statue of the Soviet soldier in the square of most of the East Bloc conquered countries, and they still stand in many of those countries, is locally known by a slang phrase in each of the Baltic and Slavic languages that roughly translates the only Russian soldier who doesn't rape. So the notion that there was some abrasion and political discomfort with that symbol of a very uncomfortable era as a social phenomenon in Estonia is not at all surprising. What is surprising is that the Estonians, as well-versed as their network management people are in the conduct of network security, felt that they had no place to turn to for a clear vision of how to respond to the attack other than US and NATO military interests. That's troubling. We have an opportunity to bring the security appropriate to a globalized, highly commercial network to the whole world. To have that spawn through the good intentions and good management practices of those who are operating the network on a global basis, each from their individual countries, collaborating through mechanisms such as the IGF could provide, and to make sure that the next time there's an attack from an unknown source against a network interest of a country that feels helpless, that they don't have to feel helpless, that they feel that they have recourse without turning to what, for my money, was an inappropriate place to go. The Estonians shouldn't have had to turn to NATO for a response to an attack against their network that was more likely socially and politically motivated than it was geopolitically or militarily motivated. And I don't think we've seen the last of those kinds of episodes. In fact, they will probably increase. The fact that the Estonian episode got so much publicity outside of the internet community, became so notorious in a relatively short time, and in fact elicited responses at the military level, at the internet security level, in countries all around the world, suggests to me that countries that want to get a splash will do that kind of attack against a relatively small victim in order to generate noise. We haven't seen the last of it. It's unfortunate, but I really believe that it's a wake-up call that we are a generation behind in appropriate mechanisms. If there is going to be a UN process, it should be agonizing less about whether or not there is full democratization on the internet and worrying more about whether there is full viability to the internet. I have written and studied on what I call that false dichotomy between liberty and security. During the post-9/11 legislative events in the United States, during the passage of the Patriot Act, other episodes, we have seen very draconian legislation that impinges on civil liberties justified in the name of increasing security. I contend that that's a false dichotomy. You don't have to balance and detract from civil liberties in order to advance security. The genius of America ought to be being able to figure out how you maximize security and maximize liberty at the same time. We ought to be able to bring that to the world and bring that to the network. That ought to be a subject that we're talking about here, not balancing and trading off, but maximizing and using our incredible energies that you see wrapped up not only in this community, but the technologies and millions of people back in each country that it represents as a community of interest, pulling our oars together to a common purpose. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our liberty in the name of security. We ought to be able to do both.